was a centurion. You've left out the most important part yet.
He feared God.
He's what?
Feared.
He did fear God, but that's not the most important part. He was not.
He was what? He prayed to God always.
He did pray to God always. Gentile. He was a Gentile. And that's what we're trying to get out of you. Oh, did you? I apologize to you because I must have missed it. So, what's unique about him being a Gentile?
The gospel had been preached to them.
The gospel had not been preached to Gentiles before. And they would have been thought at that time, if you want to be part of this, you're going to have to be circumcised and keep the law of Moses in order to be a child of God. You've got to go through the Jewish rituals to get into the church. That's what they would have thought. And so this miracle happened in these first 8 verses where the Lord appeared to him and told him to send down to Joppa and fetch Peter, Simon, whose surname was Peter, and he'll tell you words whereby you can be saved. And so he sends 2 men and a soldier down to them, and now they have come, they've arrived. It's about a 30-mile trip. They're getting close to being there. And now in verse 9, we're on the next day, because these soldiers didn't walk down there in 15 minutes. It took them a while. And so it must have been that they spent the night on the road, walked as far as they could, rested for the night, got up and got there. And look what we read, beginning at verse 9, down through verse 16. Volunteer to read? Okay.
The next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the rooftop about the 6th hour to pray. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance, and saw the heavens open, and something like a great sheet descending, bringing down by its 4 corners to the earth. And in it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. Then came a voice and said, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice came to him again a second time, What God has made clean, don't call common. And this happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven.
Okay, we mentioned last week as we were finishing up the last section that this was a double vision. Cornelius had one, and Peter has one. And we were talking about why one vision might not have been enough, and why the double vision, what would be the effect of it?
When they got together, they know it was definitely a vision from God. Although
Yeah.
I think they already knew that.
But both of them are giving a vision that matches, just like interlocking fingers. They match with each other, and that has the effect of helping to confirm to them that this is God that is working and going on there. So as we begin at verse 9, and as was just read, notice that the time has changed. What time is it? It's the next day. Noon? Okay. Next day about noon. So we've already gone advanced from 3 p.m. You're about 18 hours later, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Or is it noon will be 21 hours later they've gone. So time has changed. What else has changed? The place has changed. We're not at at Caesarea now. These men have traveled 30 miles south to Joppa, and Peter is up there on a roof in a house, and like I've told you before, that's sort of like the decks that you would have in the houses that we build. Some of them are covered, some of them are not. But the person has changed as well. It's not Cornelius, it's Peter. And so we've gone from a Gentile to a Jew. And as he became hungry, what time was it that I said it was?
Is it noon
That was-
here now?
It's noon. What are you thinking about noon? I'm ready to eat by then, and that's where he was, up on the top of the house, and he has a trance. The word trance has to do with being in a state of consciousness that is somehow partially suspended, and it's frequently associated with divine action, a trance or an ecstasy. Well, while Peter was in this trance, he sees a vision. And it was not that there was a literal sheet coming down out of heaven. If I'd have been there and he was having that trance, would I have seen it? No, it was Peter that was seeing it. So if it had been literal, anybody looked up could have seen it and saw what the nature of it was. So the next things that he says, that he saw the heavens opened. And it reminded me of two other incidences. One of them was when Jesus was baptized. The heavens were opened and the Holy Spirit descended down like a dove and came upon him. And the other one was when Stephen saw Jesus standing at the right hand of God at the time of his death. So those two sort of show what the situation is when you see the heavens open. And he sees this great sheet being let down, and it had all these kind of animals that are on it. And so Peter's thinking about his belly. He's hungry, and he sees these animals. And the listing of them is very similar to what you have in Genesis 1 at creation. You've got the wild animals. You have the birds of the heaven and the fish of the sea. Those are there, and reptiles that creep on the face of the earth. Most all of the animal kingdom is represented here. And a divine voice commands Peter in his prayer, kill and eat. Now, at that time, killing and eating these to satisfy his hunger evoked this response from Peter: by no means, Lord, for I've never eaten anything that is common or unclean. What is he talking about there, Diana?
It is about the animals which have been coming in his vision, which God defiled in the Old Testament.
Okay.
So that's what the instruction says, that to kill and eat, which the Jewish people are not supposed to do.
Okay.
As per the old commandment.
Okay, and do you remember which animals were able to be eaten and which were not? Unless you read
For
fast, you
example,
might not have got that.
Yeah, there's something with the foot which is like.
Yeah,
separated.
it couldn't be a rounded hoof like a horse. It had to be a cloven hoof.
Yes.
Is that enough? What else?
And the fish without the
Scales.
scales.
Yes. So you couldn't have catfish.
Yes.
But there was something else about the animals there.
They had to chew their cud.
Okay, had to chew the cud.
Exactly,
And
chew the cud.
that's the other thing. And what about the birds?
If it
Could you
ate
eat just
deer,
any bird?
If it ate dead things, no. If it was a scavenger, no.
It was a scavenger animal. It could not be eaten. And that's what I put up there. So what do you conclude he's seeing on this sheet? It doesn't sound like there are any clean animals that are let down out of heaven for him to eat. But the voice that speaks to him said, kill and eat. And so he protests. How does Peter address the voice that is there, that he's hearing? Who does he think it is?
He says, Lord.
He calls him Lord. And so Lord sometimes can be used of a boss, but it's not used that way here, is it? We'd see that because it's coming down out of heaven. And so he understands God is speaking to him, and as a result of that, what does "I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean" tell the reader about Peter himself?
He's a very good Jew.
He's a very good Jew. He's a practicing one. He's not somebody that's half committed and does whatever he wants to, but he's abiding by what he understands the law tells him to do. And so the voice comes a second time, and God says, "What God has made clean, do not call common." What is the meaning of that?
You mean the application of it?
Not the application, what's the literal meaning of it? If you were a practicing Jew and you heard that statement made to you, how would you understand it? Scott?
I can't help but conclude God has made them clean. So I should no longer consider them as common or unclean.
Yes.
So something's changed.
Something has changed. You think he's got that figured out yet?
No.
No, he doesn't have it, but he can see this isn't what I was brought up learning a Jew should do. But then you have this voice from heaven that you call God saying, "Kill and eat." And I think I would have been twisted just like he was. These instructions are going in contradiction to each other. So I think that's what we have to understand is happening. Interestingly enough, Jesus had addressed the traditions of the Pharisees back in Matthew 15. It's also paralleled in Mark 7. And they were making all these distinctions about following the traditions of the fathers. And they talk about the eating. It's not that you eat with unclean hands or something of that nature that defiles, but it's not what goes in you that defiles. And notice in chapter 7, verse 19, as Mark tells the story, he puts this parenthetical little clause in there. And read 19 and 20 for me. Who's got that? Mark 7, 19 and 20. You got it?
Since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled. Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him.
All right. It's not what goes in, it's what comes out. But that little parenthetical statement, he's declaring that all foods are clean. You get the point that it is there? When does that tell you that Mark was written? It must have been after Cornelius, mustn't it? And now they've put it together that when Jesus was saying that, this was really what he was doing, showing us this change that was going to occur. I. Howard Marshall, I think, sums this up real well. Read the quotation with me. The effect of the vision was thus to announce to Peter that the distinction made in the Old Testament between foods that were clean and therefore fit for human consumption and those that were unclean was now canceled, so that in the future Jewish Christians could eat any food without fear of defilement. You see the point that is there? Why could that be canceled?
Because they're under a new, they're under the law of Christ.
All right, so that means anything else for anything about the Sabbath? Does it make any difference about Pentecost and all these other things that they have to do? What kind of worship system they have? Can we go and offer animal sacrifices?
They would all have been canceled.
Is it, I can pick out and say this one was canceled, but this one wasn't? The implication of this, spreads across the whole of the Old Testament system, doesn't it? And so why is it that we don't observe the Old Testament today? Why is it that we meet on Sunday instead of Saturday?
Except it was taken away and
Nailed to the cross. And this is the first time they're beginning to grasp the significance of this. So as we go on, note that the contrast is between what God has called clean, don't you call common. Now there's a difference between God and me, isn't there, in this that is implied there. You're calling it common, but God called it clean. And so it's okay for you to eat it. And this happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up to heaven. Why was this vision repeated 3 times?
For confirmation?
Yeah, for confirmation. It makes it emphatic, doesn't it? That he's... Did you ever have to tell your children something 3 times? I think we all did, and sometimes they still didn't get the message. But this is God giving the message and repeating it 3 times. What effect does this vision have on Peter's thinking? If you'd have been Peter and it's noon and it's over, what would you have been thinking at that time?
Well, the scripture says he doubted himself.
What's that?
The scripture says he's doubted himself.
Peter's doubting himself? Okay.
He's confused.
He's confused. I figure he's out there scratching his head. What am I supposed to understand now? This just turns my whole world upside down of what I thought I had to do.
But you think that if he hadn't had the vision, and maybe he was just told to go to this Gentile person, I mean, I think it was more emphatic in the fact that he had this vision, because I'm sure he would have gone if he felt like that he was spoken to by God, but it emphasized, this is something that is going to...
Yeah. So let's go ahead to the next verse. Let me see, there's something else I have here. What Paul had concluded about the clean and unclean foods is also listed. I've got a couple of other passages I want you to look at. Look over at Romans 14:14. What did Paul say? You remember they were discussing eating with other people that you didn't have the same common ancestry with. And what does Paul say about the foods? Yes, Romans 14:14. Read it loudly.
I know and am persuaded by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean.
All right, what's the point?
It means it's okay to eat.
It's okay to eat it. If you have a conscience about it, don't eat it. But don't try to bind it on raw. That's what he's going to go on to say. There's another statement, I think, that I had here. 1 Corinthians 10:19, where that we're facing the same issue at Corinth. And what is spoken in chapter 10, verse 19. Stacy, you have that?
19?
Yes.
What am I saying then, that an idol is anything, or what is offered to idols is anything?
Read that again more slowly and louder.
What am I saying then, that an idol is anything, or what is offered to idols is anything?
Did I miss something in what I wrote down, or did...
I'm in verse 3.
I'm not doubting you, I'm doubting me.
Wasn't this the crux of what he was saying about, some people were saying it's wrong to
Yeah.
buy meat in the market that had already been offered to an idol? And he's responding to people who are saying it's sinful to eat that meat, to buy that meat and eat it.
Right.
And others were saying, I don't see any difference in that and any other meat that's there. I'm not buying it because it was sacrificed to an idol. I don't think it's more holy or anything like that.
Yeah. What I was reading from, I needed to get you to get that part she mentioned, Consider the people of Israel are not those who eat the sacrifices, participants in the altar. What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. I imply that what pagan sacrifice they offer to demons and not God. And I don't want you to be participants with demons, but the reason is because it associates you with the worship that they were doing. But it didn't matter if you went to the marketplace and you bought something. Don't ask whether it's offered to a sacrifice. Buy what you need and eat it. That's what he was saying. So he's making this one as clean as well. So with that in mind, we come down to, let me be sure I've got that, 11:16. All right, let's receive these messengers from Cornelius. Scott, you want to read?
How far are you going?
17
23? Okay.
through 23a.
Mike,
Yes.
before you go there, you've sort of thrown me off base here a little bit. You made this application to the food. I look upon this differently. He says, what you call common, that would be the attitude of a Jew toward a Gentile. And
We're not there
God-
yet.
God does not look at it like that, and Peter is about to learn that.
And
And that's the application, I think.
that's the application a few verses later. He hadn't got there yet.
I mean, that's the background.
Yeah, that's where he's headed. But I'm trying to look at, so we put this together, how it's coming across to him. Let's go to this next section, 17 through 23a, Scott.
Now, while Peter was inwardly perplexed as to what the vision that he had seen might mean, behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry for Simon's house, stood at the gate and called out and asked whether Simon, who was called Peter, was lodging there. And while Peter was pondering the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, 3 men are looking for you. Arise and go down and accompany them without hesitation, for I have sent them. And Peter went down to the men and said, I am the one you are looking for. What is the reason for your coming? And they said, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man, who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by a holy angel to send for you, to come to his house, to hear what you have to say. So he invited them to be his guests.
All right, as we look at this one, what does Peter understand at this point? Not much. He's perplexed about what it is that God is talking about. And while he's up there trying to figure it out, all of a sudden, these men arrive outside the gate, and they're asking, is Simon here? Do you think that just was happenstance?
No. Obviously, God's hand is in all of this.
All of it. From the very time that he sent those men up there, the time it took them to walk, however much time they slept, and they just get there at the same time he's finishing up with this vision. And Peter's all torn up in his mind. What is this that he's talking about? And why do you think that these men from Cornelius stood at the gate?
They were asked to? They were asked to?
They were asked to stand at the gate. Why
No,
were they?
like asked to go to that place,
They were asked to go to the place, yes.
the place, and because they are not Jews, so they were a little bit
Yeah,
reluctant.
so they don't go up to the door.
So, yeah.
That would have probably been something too forward for these Gentiles to do. So they stand out there at the gate and call for Peter that they'd like to meet him. So while Peter's pondering this vision, what does that imply to you? He's trying to process all this, isn't he? What is it
It is
God
like-
wants me to do? That's what's on his mind at this point. What does "for I have sent them" convey to Peter?
God is under control.
The Lord is in control. He doesn't even know these fellows anything about them. He doesn't know their name. He don't know where they're from. He doesn't know why they're there. And God says, you go with them because I've sent them. Now, with all the conscience that he had as a conscientious Jew, you think he'd have been willing to go if he hadn't had that vision? No, it is designed to make him realize what he needs to do. What commandment does the Spirit give to him at this point?
Do not consider unclean.
Yeah, you go. I've sent you. I know you're mixed up. I know you don't know what's going on, but you go.
Now, the guys that came, they were also Gentiles, or we don't know.
Well, we have no reason to think they're
I'm
Jews.
just wondering, well, but he invited them and they stayed in his house. That wouldn't have been customary, would it?
No, that would not have been customary. So we ask, why did Peter might hesitate? Because Gentiles and Jews did not associate with each other. That was the point that was going on. So Peter went down to the man and said, I'm the one you're looking for. What's the reason for your coming? What confirmation of what God spoke to Peter about would be immediately evident to Peter? I mean, he's up there praying. God says, these men down there are asking for you. And he gets down there, and what does he see? Men out there asking for him. So he's got to put two and two together to see something's going on like what God said he would do. Why does he ask, what's your reason for coming?
I think he's still trying to interpret the meaning of his
He's
vision.
trying to figure out what it's all about. What he hadn't heard anything about yet, he hadn't heard, you go preach to them. He didn't say Gentiles are able to obey the gospel. None of that's been said to him yet. He's still pondering, but God said, you go with those men. And so he's asking, why do I need to do that? Well, they say to him, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and to hear what you had to say. So, he invites them into, who's he staying with?
Simon the Tanner.
Simon the Tanner, who
I
is,
wonder if he asked if he minded 2 more house guests.
well, I'd hope Simon wouldn't argue with God either. But he was a Jewish tanner. But again, we've already talked about being a tanner and dealing with all the uncleanness of death. He wouldn't have been practicing as much like Peter did. And Peter's probably would have been looked down on by some Jews for staying at the tanner's house.
So the Spirit told him, go with them, I sent them.
Right.
And when he asked this question, I giggled when you asked, why did he ask it? Who wouldn't ask it? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would certainly, if I had the presence of mind, ask a similar question. But when he did, what did they tell him? An angel told us to come.
Yeah.
That confirmed what the Spirit had just told him.
Yeah.
Now, he still didn't understand everything, but he understood that much.
Yes.
There's a connection.
Yes.
I'm doing what I'm being told to do. They're doing what they're being told to do. That had
I
to give
don't
him
know what's
some-
going on, but we're going to follow this wherever God takes us. That's where he's at, I think. And so he invites them to spend the night. The urgency that Cornelius felt is manifest by his sending the 3 men. They left Joppa at 3 p.m., that's noon. You're not going to walk 30 miles before it gets dark. So you just get on your way and get there as quick as you can. And they get there sometime around noon the next day. So you can see it took a while for them to get there, but they got there. He doesn't go the same day. He doesn't pack up and head. So we've got this little blank spot that we're not told anything about. But you put together the things that happen and you figure out some things as well. Where did these 6 men come from that went with him?
I mean, the people that came from Cornelius?
No, there were 3 came from Cornelius. He takes
They're witnesses.
witnesses, and there were 6 of them. Where'd they come from?
Among the brethren,
Among the brethren. But how do they know what they're going to do?
the Jewish brethren.
Yeah, Jewish brethren. But the point I'm trying to get at, Peter couldn't just wish those 6 men with him. I can imagine that afternoon, after he found it out, Peter had to go to these men and said, hey, I need your help. I don't know what God is working, but God is doing something, and I need you to come with me. He sent me on this mission to go down to this Gentile's house. Can you imagine this scene of how it would have happened and played out? That he's got to get them to go. And why 6 witnesses? Why not just one?
Better to have multiple witnesses.
Huh?
It's better to have multiple.
It's better to have more witnesses. And if you were going to do this, what kind of brethren out of a church would you want? We don't know what the answer to it, but what would you be looking for if it were you?
Men that are well respected, possibly
Men
elders
well
and
respected.
deacons of congregations, if they have them.
Yeah. You're going to get men that whenever they say, this is what I saw, people aren't over here saying, yeah, I know what. You're one of these fellows that dreams up things like this all the time. So you see, we don't know what happened, but the implication is there, isn't it? And so Peter, as he's getting ready, yes.
Something extremely important is occurring here. And we've already looked at the vision that Cornelius has had, the one Peter has had. Now that has been brought them together with these men coming from Cornelius to Peter. He's got to know that something is happening here that's not just what happens on Tuesday.
Right. And
This is something that's great and significant,
Yes.
and he wants some people there who will verify what's happening.
but he still hadn't got to the point that Gentiles could be taught the gospel yet.
No.
And I'm moving there to that next point. Let's now go to Cornelius's explanation for why Peter sent for him. Volunteer to read. Diana?
The next day he rose and went away with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied him. And on the following day they entered Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. When Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, Stand up, I too am a man. And as he talked with him, he went in and found many persons gathered. And he said to them, You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. I asked them why you sent for me.
Okay. As we look at this narrative now, He gets up the next morning, they walk where they go, they get there, and an angel, the third day, and the angel has appeared to Cornelius, and he's telling him what motivated Peter to go with the messenger sent to him. We've already talked about that. What was it? Huh? God, he was given divine instructions. You go with these men. If Peter had disobeyed, you'd have a problem, wouldn't you? And as you go on here, how does he know that these messengers are telling the truth?
Their story collaborated what he had done.
Everything that is there. You see things falling into place. Why does Peter take some of the brethren with him? We've already talked about that. Why does he take so many? We've talked about that already. So on the following day when they get there and Peter arrives in Caesarea, why do you think that Cornelius had called together his relatives and near friends? Joyce.
He knew Peter would come. I don't know that God revealed that to him, but when an angel said he'll come, send for him, I'm sure was sure that Peter would come, and he wanted them to hear what Peter had to say.
Yeah. He may have had some of these same feelings about what do I need to be doing and making preparation. I doubt he got up that morning and said, hey, y'all come over for lunch. And everybody got there. He probably sent the message out from the time he had the angel appeared to him and told them, I'll tell you when he comes, you can come over, we'll find out what he wants us to hear. So, what was Cornelius expecting?
Maybe God is going to reveal something for us.
Yeah. This man Peter will tell us something we need to know.
There's an application here. Peter takes essentially witnesses with him. The Gentiles didn't just exactly look on the Jews with great favor either. And so he's got his family as well as some friends there, Cornelius did. So he'd have a little thought about something that's going on here
Yeah.
that's unusual.
He's got them as well. Him being described as a God-fearing man, we mentioned about he's probably somebody that worships at the synagogue with the people, but he wasn't a full proselyte yet. So when Peter arrives, Cornelius met him, fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But look what Peter says. Stand up, I'm also a man. Now the reason that has interest to me is because of what?
Peter was supposed to be the first.
He was supposed to be the first pope, and people were expected to bow down and kiss the ring of the pope, or even kiss the big toe of the statue that they have of the Apostle Peter till they wore it out, had to put it back on, the toe out. And so all of that is just debunked by this whole statement that is made here. We've already got that. How does Peter's conduct contrast with modern popes? That's what I was looking at. Wonder what Peter thought when he saw that many people gathered together. As he goes on to say, he tells them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me I should not call any man common or unclean. How did he get that out of what was said? How did he get there?
Because of the vision, right?
I had
The vision.
the vision.
Blessed by the sheep, by the end of their heart.
All right, I want to. Did he get it by command, example, or necessary inference?
Probably necessary inference.
Necessary inference,
Figured
wasn't it?
it out.
Now, sometimes people say, we can't learn anything by necessary inference that is binding on the people of God. But I want you to notice in this, We haven't heard God say a word that said, Gentiles are now clean. He told them about the unclean animals. But he begins to put on, you go with that man and you tell him what he needs to hear. Well, what was Peter's job? To go into all the world and preach the gospel to people. And he has to put all of this together to arrive at the conclusion that he just expressed.
On the other side, he's recognizing God is speaking to this man. So God is in communication with Cornelius as he is with me right now in this situation.
Yeah.
He cannot ignore that.
Yeah,
He
and
doesn't
he-
ignore it.
That's one of the evidences that go into this, to make him realize one of the most fundamental truths you and I believe, that is that the gospel should be preached to the whole world. You and I don't appreciate what a change that was.
I was just going to add, but it's nothing that Peter had not already heard from Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus talked all along about this eventually going to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And they were just not keen on understanding what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, this has got to be a moment for Peter. He
Yeah.
sees now what Jesus was talking about.
The light
is
bulb
on.
comes on. Yes.
I was gonna say something similar. Jesus talked to the woman at the well, but when she went back to town and said, I've seen the Messiah, and they all came out, he spent 3 days there talking to people in Samaria.
Yeah. But
And
it
the
didn't
disciples
register.
were there.
It didn't
watching
register with
this.
them what was happening, did it?
No.
I was gonna make a comment that you asked, when Peter came, was he surprised all these people were there? Well, I think that what it says about Cornelius, and it said that he feared God with all his household. And I just feel like, when he had this, whoever spoke to him, whatever, that I think he was a very religious man, and he wanted them to all come and hear it because
Yeah.
they were believers in God.
Okay. And that's true. Well,
Gonna ring it before
Before the other class comes in. Is there one other question or point that might be made? When the gospel was first preached, after Jesus ascended into heaven, Peter was the man
yeah.
who spoke. And now he's bringing in the Gentiles, and that same man, Peter,
He's the one that
is the one that's
opened the door.
opening the door. Sorry.
That's all right. I want y'all to look at this statement that appears in verse 33 and be prepared to talk about it next Wednesday night. We are all here present before God to hear all the things that you've been commanded to preach. Does that tell us anything about what our worship assembly ought to be? And we'll look at that as we go through there at that time. Thank you for your participation, and we'll move on.